Stanley Fisher, I've been researching his life for a long time. And he was a very, very special person. When I first came to Matawan in the early 1970s, I'd always been a history buff. But I found out about the story. I knew about the shark attacks, but I didn't know about the Matawan Creek details. I learned that when I came to Matawan. I talked to people who knew the Fisher family, and I went through a number of records and organizations that Stanley was part of, and I wanted to know more about this man who died in such an unusual way, being killed by a shark, trying to recover a body who he knew was already dead. Stanley Fisher at that time had everything in the world going for him, in that he was a good-looking guy, and he started a business in Matawan. It was the dry cleaning business, which was something new, and he was really excited about it. He had opened his tailor shop and dry cleaning business, and everything was going very, very well. And just at that time, something very, very, in fact, when I was writing my book, the early part where I'm talking about Stanley's biography, everything is going well. And it's getting to the point where it couldn't go better for Stanley. And then everybody knows what's going to happen in the next few chapters. I started catching myself, Al, can't you change the story? Give it a happy ending, because we know that Stanley's going to die very shortly. But Stanley was very, very popular in Matawan, in that his family had lived in Matawan since the 1870s. His father was a sea captain. He was actually a commodore of the Savannah Steamship Company, and they would run from New York down to Savannah, and they lived in Matawan here. And as Stanley grew up, we noticed some things about him. He was a very friendly young guy. Everybody liked him. Everybody liked him who came in contact with him. He was also very talented. When he started going to school, he liked to perform. He liked to recite poetry. He liked to sing. And he was involved in acting. And he really liked being in front of a group. And the town of Matawan loved seeing him in front of a group as he was growing up. He was also very noticeably becoming a rather large guy. And he's had a powerful physique. He became interested in athletics. He was a very, very good swimmer. And like a father who's a sea captain, you kind of expect that. But he was really, really involved in the organizations. He would be a leader because he certainly had leadership ability. In the church, he was head of the Sunday school. He was a soloist in the Methodist choir, a beautiful singer. Everything was going for him. In fact, everyone in town, in fact, the older people, they looked at Stanley and they said, boy, I wish you were my son, because he just does everything right. He's such a friendly guy. He's very talented. And the one thing about him is he genuinely cared about people. He really cared about people. He was a true Christian. And this wasn't just something he professed on Sunday. It was all week long. And that's the type of person he was. He liked to help the younger people. He became involved in the Boy Scout movement, in the YMCA. He had kind of a dual role. He helped all the kids organize their sports and learn how to play sports. He also would lead them in hymns. So after they were playing out in the field or something, they'd all come inside the church building. They'd sing hymns. So he had kind of a dual role that way. And he really, really professed his beliefs. He was very close to his family. He had one sister. Her name was Augusta, who had recently moved to Minneapolis. She married a man by the name of Arthur Nichols, who became very, very famous as a landscape architect. In fact, he was the first graduate at MIT in landscape architecture. And he really was successful, and he designed different model cities in Minnesota. He was really, really, in fact, he got involved in designing the Lincoln Highway, which was going to go across the country, all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. Really, really very successful guy. But the only problem with that is they moved to Minnesota. And it was very hard for Stanley back here, seeing his sister, who was very, very close to. And the Fisher family were really a very tight-knit unit. But now Augusta, and they would go visit Augusta a number of times. And At this point, Stanley had everything. We're now in July of 1916. Everything was going very, very well for Stanley. And he was very concerned about Lester because Lester had epilepsy and he wanted to help him play sports. He wanted to learn how to swim and do all of these things. But at the same time, he knew he had to be careful that he didn't get into a situation that could be fatal too. So Stanley was that type of person. He would help you, but he also thought about you. And when the boys ran into his tailor shop saying a shark caught Lester, Stanley didn't wonder, that's interesting, I wonder if it's going to be in the news tonight, this or that. He immediately jumped up and had to be involved. And no one had to persuade him to be involved. He immediately went down with his friends down to the Wyckoff Dock, and they were trying to locate Lester's body because they wanted the family to have the body for the funeral and to not let this horrible tragedy. Maybe there's something they could do. Could recover Lester's body. So these men, when they finally decided, and believe me, this was not something that the crowd was encouraging. It was the exact opposite. Everyone who saw it said, "Don't do this. This is a big mistake." These were very courageous men, and they were afraid that the shark, every minute that go by, would take the body back out to Raritan Bay. And they wanted, it had been a very brutal attack, and they didn't know how much of Lester was still there, but whatever was there, they wanted to recover it for the Stillwell family. And so these men were diving down, and all the way down, and as Stanley was going down, he noticed near the bottom that noticed Lester was near the bottom. He finally located Lester. He saw something was near Lester, moving around in the direction. So he immediately grabs Lester's body, brings it to the surface, and the shark attacks him full force. And he fights the shark with the help of the detectives. They're able to bring him off to the dock, and he has a horrendous wound on his leg. And his artery is severed, and it's a sad thing that when they bring him into the boat, there's like a gush of blood going up in the air because it is an artery. And everyone women are fainting, everyone nearby, they're just completely shocked by what they're seeing. One of their own being attacked in such as this way, right after he was trying to recover Lester's body. They decided to take him to Long Branch, which was Monmouth Memorial Hospital. That was one choice. They could go by train to Long Branch, or they could go to New Brunswick to St. Peter's Hospital. But the roads weren't paved, and they'd be bumping up and down in those old cars, and they're afraid that Stanley would die in the meantime. So they take him up, and he is at the train station. Now, if you can imagine this, the entire town of Matawan is at the train station because this is their family. They're waiting for the train to come and to take Stanley down to Long Branch. Right next to him is his best friend, Willie Shepherd, whose grave is right down. We walked past it, about 25 yards down there. And Willie is with Stanley, and they're up at the train station. Dr. George Reynolds is treating Stanley. But something happens which still goes down in shark history. It's unbelievable. The shark attack isn't over. Lester was attacked. Stanley was attacked. The shark now has moved back toward Raritan Bay. There's another group of boys who are swimming at the New Jersey Clay Company Brickyard. Joseph Dunn, Michael Dunn, and Jerry Hurahan. They're swimming there. Actually, the Dunns are from New York City, and they're visiting their aunt down in Cliffwood. Jerry's a Matawan boy. So they decided to go swimming because Matawan Creek is deep at that time. They can dive off and have some fun. And so they're swimming around near the New Jersey Clay Company Brickyard dock. They don't know what's happened yet because it's about a mile or half a mile downstream, and they don't know about the shark attack. But all of a sudden, a boat starts coming in the direction with Captain Cottrell and a local lawyer, Jacob Lefferts, and they start yelling, "There's a shark in Matawan Creek! Get out of the water! Get out of the water! There's a shark in Matawan Creek!" These boys immediately start to scurry out of the water, and Jerry Hurahan and Michael Dunn, well, the older boys, make it out first. They climb up. The last one up is Joseph Dunn. Joseph is climbing up, and while he's going up, the shark latches onto his leg, pulls him back to the center of Matawan Creek, and is now taking him down to the center of Matawan Creek. The other boys very heroically turn around, dive back in to Matawan Creek, and they're trying to pull Joseph away from the shark. Jacob Lefferts, the local lawyer, sees what's happening. He jumps in the water with his clothes on, and he helps. It's a tug of war. There's Michael Dunn, Jerry Hurahan, Jacob Lefferts, going this way. The shark is pulling Joseph that way. It's a tug of war. And while they're doing this, they see the shark. This is not wandering for sharks around. They see the shark. And through their heroic efforts, they're finally able to get Joseph away from the shark. He has a severe wound down the lower part of his leg. His flesh has been shredded, but fortunately no artery has been severed. So now they bring him back to the Wyckoff dock. They decide to take him up to St. Peter's Hospital in New Brunswick. So they move off in the direction of New Brunswick to treat Joseph Dunn. Stanley is up, waiting for the train. Always remember this. They're waiting for the 5:06 train. The 5:06 train. When the train comes, they're going to make an express. It's going to go all the way down to Long Branch without stopping. Finally, the train arrives. They put Stanley in the middle of the aisle. His friend Willie Shepherd's with him, trying to keep him conscious so he doesn't. They're afraid he's going to die if he passes out. He's trying to talk to him. And there's a funny story between Willie Shepherd and Stanley because they knew each other for a long, long time. Something happened back in 1903. They were friends. Stanley was older, about 4 years older than Willie. He was already a big guy. He was bouncing Willie around in his shoulders. All of a sudden, Willie fell backwards, hit his head, went unconscious, and Stanley was very, very upset, everyone, because he was unconscious for a while. And eventually, he did regain his consciousness. There were no permanent injuries. And the two of them had always joked about it, you know, Stanley and Willie, about, remember that time that you fell off my shoulders when we were fooling around? And now it's the reverse. Stanley's down on the aisle, and Willie Shepherd's the one who's above him, comforting his friend. So it's kind of a unique twist. What's interesting, this isn't a fictional story. This is real life. And they're together, and they arrive at Long Branch, and an ambulance meets them. They take Stanley over to the hospital, and they're going to do surgery on him. And they don't really think they're going to be able to save the leg, but they want to save his life. But they can't do surgery yet because he's had an arterial damage and he's lost so much blood. And if they try doing any surgical procedures, he's going to die just from the trauma of the surgery. So they're gonna try to help him a little bit better. And just when Stanley is down, about ready to start the surgery, he motions to Dr. Field, who is the attending surgeon, who wants to say something. And as Dr. Field comes down, the last words out of Stanley Fisher's mouth before he dies is, "I got Lester away from the shark. I did my duty." And he dies. His last words weren't about himself. Why did I do this? How could this possibly happen to me? His last words before he died were about his friend Lester Stillwell. And so there's a story here that I really think is worth remembering. It was a story of devotion. It was people who took their religion very, very seriously and their friendship seriously. They knew each other. They cared about each other. None of these individuals who helped Joseph Dunn, who were trying to recover Lester's body, they were not professionals. They were average, everyday people. But they cared. They were doing this for their neighbor, for people who they knew. And it was very, very important. And they knew the risk. These people weren't reckless people. They knew the risk, and they did it anyway. And Stanley died in a very heroic way, doing what he knew he had to do. It was his duty as a man, and he wanted to do this for his friend Lester. And like I said, there are a lot of people in small Matawan, New Jersey, who behaved in a very, very heroic way on July 12th, 1916. And it's about now. Stanley is going down. He's checking for Lester. He hasn't been attacked quite yet. That's going to happen very shortly. It is 100 years ago today. Now, Stanley, in fact, it was sad because Stanley's parents weren't, in fact, Fisher family will be coming down here, also relatives of Lester Stillwell. And also, I find the family of Joseph Dunn is here. So this is, and also we've got relatives from Arthur Smith, who's one of the heroes. They're all going to be here when we unveil the monument coming up. I'm so delighted with that. But the important thing that we remember here as we look back on this time is that these people did these things. And Matawan and the people of that era, there wasn't the idea of me first or I'm not going to get involved or something like that. It was really very much the opposite. They were involved, and it wasn't just someone in town that should I do something, shouldn't I? It was their family, and they truly believed this. This wasn't a put on, and that's what we've really been trying to commemorate during our shark attack activities. Is that these people, Lester and Stanley and everyone else who was involved at that particular time, it was very hard on people in Matawan. We're honoring you. We're honoring all of you, and we're very, very careful that we do this the right way, and that yes, you could. In fact, you're in the cemetery right now. If you want to smile, if you want to laugh, you have our permission that you can smile and laugh. Because, in fact, I want to tell you one story. Stanley had a wonderful sense of humor. Sometimes when someone dies heroically, you say, oh, it's kind of like Abraham Lincoln down at the Lincoln Memorial. You're a statue or something. Stanley wasn't that way at all. He was a great guy. He really cared about people, but he had a sense of humor. You won't mind me telling this story, Stanley, will you? In that, and he loved acting. So one time in the Matawan High School auditorium, they put on a play. Stanley did a play with his good friend George Harris, and the title of the play was kind of unusual: "The Breach of Promise of Miss Stanley Fisher and George M. Harris." It was a spoof, and they put this on. It was hilarious. Everybody in Matawan watched this, and they were howling with laughter. And they were all trying to decide. They were talking about what should the verdict be in this trial between Miss Stanley Fisher and George M. Harris. But Stanley was the type of person who enjoyed having a laugh. And everyone around him, they laughed too. And it's hard to imagine this. But the whole town of Matawan had a special feeling for Stanley Fisher and for Lester Stilwell. And it was so hard. Like I said, it was kind of like Matawan's 9/11 when this happened back on July 12, 1916. And that's really what we're going to be commemorating. Reverend Wigginton, you want to make a few remarks here about Stanley, and then I'll come to you, Jeff.